life, there's a couple of different rules that I live by and a couple of different things that I set for myself. Obviously, there's a few different things that I do, on a day-to-day basis and some best practices, if you will, things like that. But there's typically only one phrase that I live by, and that's aggressive matters. In anything you do, aggressive is going to matter, right? Whether it be your aggressive approach in business, in finding new opportunities, in finding jobs, to the victor goes the spoils. And I think that what we saw from Scott Fitterer, Matt Rule, and David Tepper this year in the draft was an absolute masterclass in aggressive. Two people that come from super aggressive backgrounds in both Fitterer and David Tepper. Not so sure if Matt Rule is the aggressive type, but it seems like it when you look at a lot of what we put on the field last year, play calling, things like that, and the things that we would try. But when you look at where we started off with 7 picks in this year's draft, well, 8, including the compensatory pick that we got from the Broncos for Teddy Bridgewater, and 11 picks total, 5 trades. 5 trades. That is super aggressive. And I got to tell you, as far as draft grades go, I know everybody has their opinions on grades, things like that. I'm going A+ only because I'm going to ride for the squad regardless of what happens. Now, there are times that I'm going to be, obviously, and there's some picks here that I, would look at and say, not really sure about that one. But for the most part, I'm going A+. So you start off with J.C. Horn. That's an A+ all across the board. Obviously, he and Surtain 1 and 1A, right? J.C. Horn, 33% completion percentage against, other teams. Best in the SEC, press man corner. He was often asked, or just about every time asked, in South Carolina to go line up against the next team's best offensive player. And so to welcome that challenge and to have a guy who has a dad that was a, football player himself, a professional football player himself, Joe Horn kind of, I was reading so many different stories about how he had started prepping JC so early in his life. Obviously JC didn't have to grow up as rough as Joe Horn did, but Joe took him back to Metro Atlanta to play Pop Warner football as opposed to him going to, some of the more, upscale, places to play, so just that dog in him early on, and so he kind of has that I've got it out the mud mentality as far as my talent is concerned. I know sometimes people get that misconstrued when it comes to success and things like that because they look at what you have available to you as far as resources are concerned. But there's equally as many stories of people who have resources who turn out to be bigger failures than people who had nothing, right? And those people who have resources, there's stories of them going from, having resource to building it even bigger, right? Because they still have that I got it out the mud mentality. And I think we have a guy like that here. Then we go to the second round. Terrace Marshall, not super unbelievable stat lines, but to hold your own on a team with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, and to be a part of an offense that, was likely one of the best offenses in college football history, coordinated by, of course, passing game coordinator Joe Brady. Not offensive coordinator total, but, passing game coordinator nonetheless. But to have a guy that was a part of that pedigree of play, he's going to bring some of that same energy and that juice down to Carolina with him. Now, it's not like we, need a robust, shot in the arm when it comes to the receiving core because we've got DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, both 1,000-yard receivers, but it's always going to help to bring in another guy that adds another versatile, option available to you at the position, right? Then we get to a pick that, some people were left kind of scratching their heads when you consider especially people like myself who made videos talking about, offensive tackles. And we bring in Brady Christensen from BYU. Now, from my understanding, Brady Christensen stands about 6'6", a little over 300 pounds with 33-inch arms. And we know how I feel about, offensive tackles with longer arms. Now, I have to say this, because when I made my video about Rashawn Slater, my video was highlighting one, the fact that I wouldn't take a tweener player at number 8 overall, personally, right? It would have to be a surefire left tackle. Panay, to me, was a surefire left tackle, right? But if he's a guy that could slide into that guard position and become, Rashawn Slater, for all we know, he could end up being a Hall of Fame tackle. He could end up being a Hall of Fame guard, or he could be a bust. That's big boomer bust potential. As a matter of fact, Terrace Marshall, I go back to him for a second. Boomer bust potential, according to NFL.com, right? kind of right in that. He's either going to be really good or he's going to stink it up, right? And I think Brady Christensen could fall in that same category, right? So who knows what he's going to formulate into, but at least we know with both the free agent acquisitions and the draft, they are addressing the offensive line need. So it is something to, of note. And then you go right behind that and you bring in Tommy Tremble, who's not necessarily a possession tight end, but a better blocking tight end. As a matter of fact, the best run blocking tight end in the country. So what does that tell you? We're going to go aggressive with the rush as we have been because we have a Christian McCaffrey. Then we bring in a Chuba Hubbard in the 4th round. We're going to be super aggressive with the running game to try to relieve as much pressure off of Sam Darnold to make him feel like he doesn't have to take a game over, right? If you go look at every super successful team, they all have that formula. Obviously you're going to have those players like, okay, here's a good example. Like Patrick Mahomes did the very same thing that Peyton Manning did a few years ago, where he threw over 50 touchdowns in the season. And yet and still, even with that, it still took a miracle effort from him to beat San Francisco, who came into the playoffs in that Super Bowl as the best running team in football, right? And in the playoffs, even better running team. I want to say in the playoff game that they played against Green Bay, Jimmy Garoppolo threw the ball, 8 times? Raheem Mostert went crazy. So to me, it's one of those things that you always have to have that balance. Now, the game has changed to the point where the quarterback is the central focus. This isn't the 80s where you could have a running back be the premier player on your team and say that you could be a legit Super Bowl contender. It's not that anymore. So I'm not downplaying the position or importance of the position. Excuse me. But what I am saying is that the running game does matter. So it's cool to see them bring in a Chuba Hubbard, who I think could potentially be the biggest steal of this whole draft. Like, he may be a value pick right here, right? And so then moving forward, Davion Nixon. I'm not really familiar with Davion. Obviously, this is someone I'll do a little more research on as time continues. But, from what I understand, a really athletic, I think 6'3", a little over 300 pounds, D tackle, just seems like a stud, right? And then one of my favorite players of this draft was Keith Taylor, press man corner. Didn't have a whole lot of interceptions, but just a really tall, like physical, press, cornerback. And to me, he could turn out to be Scott Fitter's Richard Sherman style find. Now, obviously J.C. Horn is going to likely be the number one, corner and everything like that. But in terms of where Richard Sherman was drafted with Seattle and then bringing in a Keith Taylor, he could, turn out to be that kind of, late round gem, that you look for. And then I got to be honest, this player right here it's a trip. Deontay Brown. I've seen so many comparisons with this kid. I'm not a huge, I think I want to say it's Dragon Ball Z or Pokemon, I think it's Pokemon, right? Blastoise. I seen a meme flying around. I may be saying the name wrong. Correct me in the comments if I get that wrong. I'm sorry to all the fans out there. Beef Advantage. I heard that name. Pause. I even heard someone or seen someone write that he looks like a battle toad. I was like, that was the craziest thing ever. But I mean, just a freak of nature, man, just a humongous guy. And I know that his weight was a bit of a concern, but I think he dropped a few pounds, recently, and just a big run stuffer guy, man. And I feel like he's going to be one of those guys that a lot of other teams would have wished they would have took a second, look at, later down the line. I feel like he's going to develop into a really strong, stout player. Now, obviously, I know all these players that we're mentioning right now, like in theory, we would like to think all of them are going to be absolute studs. There's probably going to be a couple of them that, end up flaming out, who knows? But it's just exciting to me to see how aggressive they were in their approach to the draft, right? Here's another aggressive move. Not Shi Smith. I mean, Shi Smith will come back to him in a second. To me, an aggressive move in the 6th was Thomas Fletcher. I mean, you would have thought that set Twitter on fire as far as our fans is concerned, because a long snapper, which is still a position of need, but most people were just super frustrated, by this pick. And so I understand it. And I mean, obviously the, phone call that he gave the Matt Rule was really cool. And it kind of highlighted just the kind of person Matt Rule is and how, you could see where he's building this culture, like just the back and forth between them two, and then the back and forth with David Tepper. It just, one of the things that I'm just so excited about that I see, it looks to me, and maybe they're just, saving face for camera, and it could be, I don't know. But when I look at Scott Fitter when I look at Matt Rule and I look at David Tepper, I don't see the same things that I saw last year from Hurney and Tepper and Matt Rule, because, you could kind of see where they were like, there's a little pushback here and there. It looks like these guys were all on the same page, and the page really was, let Scott work. We're going to let Scott look. Matt, you know these players. You're going to be coaching these players. We want your input, Mr. Tepper. We want your input as well. But we're going to let Scott work. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to go after player with, we're going to look at analytics, which I really love. Relative athletic score, I think it's called. Most of the players we picked were in the higher tier of those scores. So analytics is a big part of our draft process now, which I love. So it's just really cool to just watch how this whole process is taking place. And then one of the things, like I mentioned, Shi Smith. The Shi Smith pick is going to be very interesting because, he's another to me that could be a boom or bust potential, but it doesn't really cost you much. It's not like the Terrace Marshall where it's a second-round pick. Like, any pick is a pick, right? But a sixth-round pick is not necessarily going to be the break in the bank. You can kind of, it just kind of is what it is, right? But this guy had very, very shoddy quarterback play. So it's a good chance that he could end up being a real big find in that sixth round. And then obviously finished off the draft with Phil Hoskins at defensive tackle, huge guy out of Kentucky. And then picked up a few unrestricted or undrafted free agents, as well. So I think all in all, we had a really good draft. I mean, regardless of, what it turns out to be, I think it was just a great time, man. It was good to see fans there and, everything. I just thought this was amazing just to watch. But during the draft, I caught something. And I thought this was very interesting because I listened to a couple of different analysts and experts say something that I thought was pretty interesting. And they mentioned how, regardless to the draft grade of any of these teams, let's take, the Jets, for instance, with Zach Wilson, or San Francisco with Trey Lance. Regardless of the draft grades of these teams, none of this means anything if the quarterbacks flame out, right? So it's not going to mean anything at all. Now, I want you to take into consideration the guys that were just drafted, right? Trey Lance, number 3, Zach Wilson at number 2, 15, Mac Jones, Davis Mills, Kellen Mond, all these different quarterbacks that came off the board. Kyle Trask going to Tampa, which was crazy. You got all these different players off the board. Now I want you to listen what to this panel had to say about what they thought as far as the winner of the quarterback portion of this draft. Check this out. This is pretty interesting.
And I'm going to go ahead and say this because I don't think Lewis and Mel have heard me, Todd's heard me say it all weekend. After the Jacksonville Jaguars, who certainly won the quarterback draft, Carolina Panthers second. They got Sam Darnold.
Carolina Panthers second. That's in this draft. I want you to consider something, right? Sam Darnold in a draft with some of the most popular quarterbacks that we've seen. Like, this is probably going to go down as important a quarterback draft as, let's say, the 2000 and what year was 2012 draft? Robert Griffin, Andrew Luck, Russell Wilson, Ryan Tannehill. I mean, that was a pretty big draft as well. Imagine throwing a random like a Sam Darnold in that draft that was drafted a couple of years prior and saying that the team that got him in a trade actually won second best. If you take Trevor Lawrence out of it, they got the best quarterback pick. That's wild.
Yeah, I still believe, man. And with all the weapons that you just mentioned, Joe Brady, I mean, became a believer in Joe Brady, seeing how he transformed Joe Burrow in the LSU offense. I think he's going to do the same thing with Darnold. They were already close. They had 8 games.
8 games that they lost by 1 score.
8 games. 8 freaking games by 1 score or less.
I talked to Matt Rule at the
or not less, but 8 games.
Senior Bowl that week, and he was saying, we just need that dude. We need a guy who can lead that drive that we've been missing this past year, because we feel like we're a more complete team than our record indicates.
Now, I want to build on top of what Todd McShay is saying right there when he talks about we need that guy, we need that dude. We heard that a lot from, David Tepper in media last year, Matt Rule in the media, which I got to be honest with you, I didn't really like that too much, because I think you got to give a vote of confidence to whoever you put on the field, because, again, you got to remember, they were the ones that went out and made that decision to bring in Teddy. They were the ones that signed him to the 3-year deal. So I don't think you can go out and then start putting your foot in your mouth saying like, well, we need a guy that just galvanizes the troops and things like that, because Teddy was never that guy. Regardless of what we saw on the field, like Teddy's the kind of guy that if everything is perfect around him, he's going to make things happen. It's not going to be, obviously Teddy's not a world beater. He's not going to go out and throw, 30, 40 touchdowns in a year, right? But if you put a solid system around him, he's not going to turn the ball over, and he'll make things happen. His 5-0 record with the Saints, that's nothing to, push to the side. I think that, along with what happened his last year in Minnesota as a full-time starter at 11-5, those are two things that I think the team seen when they made the decision to bring him in. The thing with me and Teddy and how I feel about him, right? I feel like with Teddy, like I'll give you an example. I think you have to have one or two things going for you, or if you have both at the same time, then you can become great, right? Teddy's the kind of guy, like, here's the example I'll give, right? Let me just do this real quick. I remember being in the mall once in my hometown, and there was a guy that walked in the mall. His name was Kenny George. He used to play basketball for the local university. And I mean, this guy was enormous. I think he was like 7'5", 7'6", something crazy, right? One of the tallest basketball players ever. And when he walked into the mall, people were just, I remember just staring like, my God, like, how is this even real? He looks like he was walking on stilts. I mean, little kids running up, grabbing him on his legs and stuff like that. He's just trying to get a piece of pizza. He was cool about it, just taking pictures and all that other kind of stuff because he's used to it, right? When a guy walks into a room, like if you see a Trey Lance walk into the quarterback room, I remember hearing a story about Cam Newton when he first got to Auburn, coming out of Blinn Junior College, and, was flipping tires, tractor tires or whatever with some of the offensive linemen. And people were like, who's this new recruit that we got, like defensive end? Oh, that's the quarterback. Huh? And I mean, just a physical athletic freak, right? Cam was. When you walk in, you either have to have that, or you have to be the guy that, if you don't have that, compensates in other areas, right? Take Drew Brees, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, guys like that, for instance. Doug Flutie, from a while back. These guys had an overwhelming amount of leadership quality. They were vocal. They galvanized their guys. And I think even when you're a physically imposing guy, you got to have that. To me, Teddy had neither. Teddy was small in stature, quiet guy, real good kid. Teddy's the kind of guy, if you want me to be honest with you, Teddy's the guy that you would want your daughter to marry, right? The guy that's not going to do anything outside, he's going to keep it conservative, keep it in the middle of the road, but not do anything like super great, right? He's not going to take any risks. He may smile a little bit, say a few words here and there, but he's mostly quiet and reserved and, just a real good, solid dude. But for an NFL quarterback, oftentimes, especially when you're called on to do something special in the moment when you need it, it doesn't often come. And I think that was one of the biggest drawbacks. And I think the opposite with Sam Darnold. I've seen Sam Darnold run down the field, and juke a few players and get into the end zone and spike a ball. Maybe no dancing or nothing like that, but, a little fire in the belly. I've seen Sam Darnold chirping at some guys on the field. I've seen Sam chirping at some of his teammates to get in position and things like that. And you can see that by how everybody talks about him. I've said this before. There are so many people, like you would have to go literally seek and find people that have anything bad to say about Darnold's move. Ton of people, like the New York media, destroyed him for his play, but they also destroyed Adam Gase equally and the team equally. But upon his leaving and coming to Carolina, you literally would have to go scour the internet and find, and there's people out there, obviously, there's people that are our fans, right? But for the most part, the people, the talking heads, people like myself that are fans, the people that are experts like Mel and Ty that do this for a living, they all say the same thing. Like all of them are like, this guy's going to be successful. Now it remains to be seen, but I'm optimistic.
And I agree with them. And now you bring in Terrace Marshall, you bring in a Shi Smith, you obviously Sam Darnold comes in and he immediately upgrades the quarterback spot. I think you're putting him in a position to really succeed. He's never had a Christian McCaffrey. He's never had an elite receiver. He's never had depth at wide receiver.
Well, let's dive into that a little bit, because here's something I want to push back a little bit too with the fans as well, because a lot was made about us not drafting more offensive linemen, right? Even though we did draft 2 and grabbed another one that was David Moore from Grambling, I believe, a name that a lot of people were, kind of buzzing about, so he'll get his opportunity to come into camp and see what he's made of. We did bring in Elfline. We did bring in Cam Irving. So are these players that could completely turn a situation around? Who knows? But I would question this. How much turnaround does this offensive line actually need? Here's why I say this. Robbie Anderson, career high, 1,096 yards receiving. Curtis Samuel, 851 yards with 3 touchdowns in the air, 200 yards on the ground. Total, 1,051 yards. DJ Moore, 1,193 yards receiving. Mike Davis, 642 yards on the ground, 373 in the air. John, what are you getting at? What I'm getting at is, how would these players be able to, how would we have 4 guys that go over 1,000 yards from scrimmage and have an offensive line that is as bad as most people try to make it out to be? I don't see it. I'm not saying that the offensive line is perfect. And sure, you can give me some stats to talk about how much Teddy was under pressure and everything like that, but he was able to deliver the ball to 4 players who had over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. 2 of those, one who rushed for 642 yards and another one that rushed for 200. And that's not mentioning Christian McCaffrey, who rushed for over 200 himself, even in the injury season. So our offensive line is not as bad as it's made out to be. That's the first thing I'm going to say. The second is this. Let's compare what we have to what the Jets had to work with. Jamison Crowder, 699 yards, 6 touchdowns. Not bad. Denzel Mims, 357 yards, no touchdowns. Braxton Berrios, 394 yards, 3 touchdowns. We saw one of those touchdowns come on a throw that is a $100 million throw from Sam Darnold. We've talked about that before. Frank Gore, rushing, 653 yards with 2 touchdowns. Lev Bell, before the trade, 74 yards. Think Sam's coming into a little bit better situation?
He hasn't had a lot of things in his career. When you sit here and you really think about it, what's interesting, though, is that when we talk about quarterback success, failure, and we don't ever contextualize it and add all these other factors into it that determine success or failure, you're really doing these guys a disservice.
I agree. And that's why, to me, do I think that we in the, as far as fanship is concerned, we're a little too hard on Teddy, especially on social media? Man, made him block his, or go private on his social and things like that. Of course. But do remember, Sam put up with a lot of that same stuff as well. Sam put up with the crazy fans. Not saying that you guys are crazy fans, so don't, there's a few of us, but, take that in stride. Sam put up with that. Sam put up with the New York media, the back page in New York with all the different headlines, a little, crazy little things that they put out there, right? Sam put up with hearing about a tanking season, tanking for Trevor Lawrence all year long. Sam put up when they start winning games, people being upset because they were out of the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes. He had to deal with all that. And he still showed up with the lunch pail every day. Let's work.
And I'll tell you, it's interesting because we know that Sam Darnold didn't get the kind of support that he's going to get down there. We know that he didn't get the kind of support that they're going to give their young quarterback in New York now. Zach is going to have a totally different atmosphere for him. And you're right, Reese. They could very well have won this draft. You could see the best of Sam Darnold going forward now. Because now, I'll tell you what, now all the people who have been naysayers of his, they're kind of sitting there biting their nails going, well, let's just see how this works out. Because if he does blow up in a good way, it's going to just lend more credence to the fact that, look, you've been saying it all along, Mel. They gave him no help. They didn't protect him in any way, with whether protecting him on the football field or protecting him from, all the different things that people were coming down on him with that were unfair and that weren't any of his doing. So that's what's interesting to watch. That's the part I love about team building.
How excited is he, Mel, to go start working with Joe Brady?
Well, let me ask you this. I think he's really excited because Joe Brady should be an offense maker. But
Mel Kiper's getting ready to say something again that we talked about in just a moment ago. Where would Sam Darnold fall if he was drafted in this draft? Listen to this. It's pretty interesting.
Where would you put Sam Darnold if he was coming out this year, going back to his USC grade, and knowing what you know now about Sam Darnold, fighting through all the issues, finishing all 3 seasons, I thought strong. I chronicled that the other night. Every year, last 5-6 games, last 9 games, he was putting up the numbers. In this draft, I would have him 2 behind Trevor Lawrence. I said if we were drafting today, I would take Sam Darnold as the second.
You're saying
he's still only 23 years old.
Yeah, you're saying maybe Kyle Trask.
He's younger than Joe Burrow.
So you're saying knowing what you know about the dysfunction that he had to put up with in New York.
I think it's a plus.
Oh, it's
had to deal with all that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a meat grinder that he went through.
So he's
an
the second
absolute
quarterback off the
meat
board.
grinder.
Yeah.
I mean, when you talk to him, we got a chance to talk to him this year. It's amazing just the positivity that still radiates from this young man, given the fact that he knew that there were so many competing forces going against him.
Great
and
point.
he didn't blink about it. He wouldn't make any excuse. He would, and we were trying to get him to, and he wouldn't. He just absolutely wouldn't.
Did you get the impression that it's real? Because the one I believe I've made that pretty clear. The caveat I would say, did he get broken? You know, I mean, you can say it.
Yeah.
What sense did you get from him that
No, I didn't get that sense at all. I didn't get the sense that he's broken. I didn't get the sense that he's someone who now is going to, feel as though that everything that happened to him, he's going to carry with him down.
I agree with that. I don't think Sam's broken at all. As a matter of fact, I always go back to that video of him walking into kind of a little draft room with his family, or not draft room, but like a little trade room, if you want to call it that, with his family. Seeing how excited he was, seeing that he said he was going to a place that he felt like really wanted him. I felt like when we passed on Justin Fields, and real quick, let's just say this out loud, right? Let's go ahead and get it out the way. Everybody take a deep breath. Say it out loud. We passed on Justin Fields. One more time. We passed on Justin Fields. And it's okay. It's okay. Now, I think that the J.C. Horn pick and passing on Justin Fields lends credence to exactly what Sam said in his press conference, which is he was excited to go to a place that he felt like truly wanted him. And with what we done in both the first and second round, because there were other quarterbacks there. There were other opportunities to move up, and we didn't take any of those guys. Lends credence to this is Sam's show. And I got to tell you, that speaks to what I'm talking about here. The golden rule of life. Aggressive. Matt Rule, Scott Fitterer, David Tepper, they are going to, well, for Tepper, it really doesn't matter that much, right? Because he's the owner. Well, it does and it doesn't. Because obviously you got to drive revenue. He's got so many other things going on that he'll be fine, right? But when it comes to Scott Fitterer and Matt Rule, the thing that I love is like, hey, if we're going to go all in on the Sam Darnold situation, we're going to do everything in our power to make sure he's successful. And I love it. I love the aggressive approach.
Down to Carolina. I believe as long as they come out of the gate with him and he has some success right away and he doesn't have to really face any of those old demons, great. Now, if he gets down there and all of a sudden he's starting to get hit again and things aren't going well, of course, you're going to start going, yeah, he was broken.
What's the greatest?
But I don't think that's going to happen.
What's the greatest teacher? And anything is experience. He's got the experience. He's 23 years old.
As long as it
He's
doesn't
battled
break
through it all. It didn't break him.
I don't believe it did either. I'm just saying as long as
if
it
anything,
doesn't.
he's rejuvenated and he's learned
too
what
much
went on in New York to make him a really good quarterback in Carolina. When we all say, and we all agree, we like Zach Wilson, I like Justin Fields more, we like them all, and I would put Sam Darnold too.
I would too.
And a lot of people I talk to would. Come on. And Reese is right there with everybody. Well, if that's the case, how is Carolina, when you think about where they are right now, if you're a Panther fan, you got to be really excited.
There it is. That's it. If you're a Panther fan, you got to be super excited. Super, super excited. I got nothing else to say, but keep pounding.
Wake up in the morning, I'm focused in on what really matters. And these rappers still chatter as if it even matters. Stack money like books, I'm on my next chapter. Cause at the end of the day, what are you really after? 5% of my salary goes to charity. I'm engaged to success. Who'da known it would marry me?